You guys can hear us, am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Bruce Riley.
What's up?
How many of you guys love the movie? First time director, all time writer. Please let the people know how excited you are about your film.
Well, you know, it's hard to wrap my head around. I'm just excited for people to take it in and, you know, and have things to think about and talk and say about it. So yeah, it's the most I could hope for, which is that you know, it stimulates thought. Hopefully, some of that thought turns into action. But you know, as an artist, what's happening right now is the most I could hope for.
Your movie did very well at Sundance, and tell us the strategy and the personality of working with great actors like Lakeith.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, if you're gonna make a sculpture, you know, having all the tools at your disposal is really important. And you know, I picked actors that not only want to get more famous. I don't know if they do, but I'm sure they do. But I you know, that people like Lakeith, when I met with him, it was clear that he wanted to become a better actor, and he's always striving and searching for ways to do that. And it is, you know, so I saw that in him, and you know, we built on this character, talked about him for months, and just to be able to be around folks that are masters of their craft like that. Okay.
Mike,
Folks that are masters of their craft and are real, everyone, and were really dedicated to making this right. So a lot of it was almost like a problem-solving thing. Like sometimes the scene wasn't working, and you know, I've heard of stories of actors that are already really well known that are kind of like, well, this is what you get. This is what you know. But everyone was working together to try to make things happen, and having actors like, so for instance, Lakeith and Tessa have very different approaches to acting. Tessa is like, came from theater, has been doing this for a long time, and in many ways, I've said, like, she's like the drummer, you know, like she's got it down, she's figured out what she's gonna do, and you know that, and she's done a lot of her sculpting beforehand. There's some happening right there, but Lakeith is somebody who doesn't even like learn his lines until the day before. You know, but we've been talking about, you know, he knows the emotional points and what is happening, but you know, which is why he gets this sort of delivery that seems like it's right there, like, because we're all trying to figure out what we're gonna say right now, you know, and so he's focused more on being emotionally in the moment, and then the lines, I don't know, you know, I can't speak for him, but that's what I observed. And having that together, having these different like textures of acting styles together, really helped to make it, you know, help to give it dimension. And you know, same thing like for having like Lakeith with Army. Sometimes I was so excited about these scenes that they were shooting that I didn't yell cut. Like, I just let them keep going. And sometimes that ended up in moments that most of it was unusable. But because they would go off, you know, because they're just improvising. They go off on whole other storylines that they're making up right then. But like sometimes it provided a moment that I was looking for or worried about how I was gonna make happen, and it happened and things like that. So one example is that when he's getting the promotion, it was supposed to end with a champagne pop, and then I just let them keep going. And you know, that's, you know, then Kate is like, you know, you should drink it, and he's just like, drink it like now, and then she's like, he drinks, and she's like, cause we didn't have any cups, cause we didn't plan on any of that stuff, but it got us one of a very important moment where he's like really like celebrating, and then he looks over to where his friends are for just a second, and then gets back to the celebrating, and that, you know, was really important for telling the story. Certain things like that that are part of the improvisation that happens, you know, sometimes whether it's
Testing.
sometimes whether it's with the actors or with the fact that we might just come into a place and we have a new location, and so everything else that we planned is just, it's out the window, and we got to figure it all out right then.
You worked with a great actor who everybody here should know, Danny Glover.
Yes.
Please tell the people what that process is like, and how did you get Danny Glover to be in your first movie?
Well, Danny Glover is probably the person that the actor that I've out of. Danny Glover is the actor out of everybody in the cast that I've known the longest, because him and my father were part of the San Francisco State Strike in 1968 that created the first ethnic studies department in the United States. Beautiful. But he was the last person to sign on because your friend's son has a script. You know, like, that doesn't necessarily sound like the most promising endeavor. And yeah, but once he came on, he definitely brought this energy that made that where all the other actors kind of, you know, he gave, he had so much respect for the production that I think even though everybody else did as well, it made everybody feel like they were part of something even more important than that. And you know, he had a great relationship, or a great effect on Lakeith. We were shooting something one time, I think it was his last one, and then he was just, you know, getting up to walk away, and I think he said something like, he leaned over to Lakeith and said, I look forward to watching you over the years grow and blow everyone's minds. And like, you know, it just was a touching moment that, you know, because I don't think that Lakeith even knew if he knew who he was at that point.
Right.
You know, so it was, yeah.
That leads me into the writing aspect, because not only did you direct it, you also wrote this film, and there are so many different political strong points that you mixed up very well. Explain that process.
Well, when I started, so I started writing it in 2011. I got to the end of it the first time in 2012. We put it out as its own paperback book on McSweeney's in 2014. But when I started writing it, all I knew was that it was going to happen in the world of telemarketing. And I knew that there was going to be a struggle that he had to decide which side he was on. That's all I knew. And I knew the opening scene, because that was how my boy Rob Ebo got all his jobs, and he never got caught though. And then I knew the compliment argument scene, because that happened to my little brother years ago, and I was always like, I'm gonna put that in a movie one day. So I knew that these were things that were gonna happen. That's all. But, you know, so I didn't know that
there was going to be anything fantastical or absurd in it. All of those things came because they were needed at the time. They were, I took the ride with Cassius after that first scene. I just kind of asked questions about what needed to happen. And at certain points, a lot of what I'm doing when I'm creating stuff, even in music, is part of it is like avoiding cliche, because you find that you lean towards cliche. Now, what's wrong with that? And, why not just sing the tune that everybody knows? Why not just do the thing that everybody knows? Maybe there's some value to that, like stories that everyone knows, repeating them and all that sort of stuff, almost like a mantra. But for me, I realized that the reason that a lot of people lean into cliche is because they're not really writing or creating from their own experience in their own lives. So much of what we think is our own experience, or what we think about the world, has been from some other piece of art that has shaped our view of the world. So for instance, I've never been to Delhi, but I have a clear picture in my head when I talk about the city of Delhi. I can picture people's clothes. I can picture the streets, like what color the streets are, and the walls of the buildings, and what kind of transportation it is, and maybe even some sounds. And where do I get that from? Because I've never been there, and I never even watched a documentary about it. But it comes from like James Bond movies or Mission Impossible or something like that, where probably had, like a whole bunch of racist stereotypes that are in there. And so if I were to sit down and write if I were to be someone hired to write a scene that happens in Delhi, and I've never been there, I'm going to end up writing things that are cliched. And that's similar with love songs or whatever, like there's certain parameters of this is what a love song is. Do you love me? How long are you gonna love me? Do you really love me? Do you love me more than that person? But your version of love might be like, I really love you, I'm really attracted to you, and I can hang out with your parents for only 3 hours, and can you not laugh like that in front of my friends, because it's embarrassing. And all those things might be real, but it's weird to think about putting them in a song, because that might automatically make it not a love song, because it doesn't fit those things. And also, to figure out that that's what you think about it is hard, because you're gonna be going towards what other people's idea of love is in other songs. So when I'm making these scenes, I have to think about, what do I really think about that, whatever the subject is or the situation, based on my own experiences, like what are the things I believe about it? What are those? And for me, like many of those things have to do with whatever is materially happening in context with other things outside of it. So some philosophical things or whatever, and how do you get that in there? Do you have somebody come along and say, well, if you blah, 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 and blah, 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 then the such, and some slogan like that, very cliched with message, and I didn't want to do that. So I found that if I bent reality at those points, it talked about a bigger idea that we could connect to something in our own reality.
True.
And then in a way end up being more real than like movies that are supposed to be hyper realistic, because they're not talking about these other ideas and connection.
You mentioned bending reality. You're a musician. You come from a group. Anybody ever heard of the Coop? My first question is the soundtrack. It's incredible. You being a writer and from the Coop, explain the musical process as well. And also, the Coop is doing the music, the soundtrack for the movie. Am I correct?
Well, so there, in this movie, there are two musical worlds. There is the soundtrack, which is done by the Coup, which is all the stuff that the characters can hear in their world. So, diegetic stuff, the stuff that's in the club, or I mean in the bar, in the car, outside, whatever. Anything that the characters in the movie could actually physically hear. That's the soundtrack, and that's the Coup's new album, which I think might be dropping on Friday. And
That's beautiful.
and it's called the soundtrack to Sorry to Bother You, not to be confused with the album Sorry to Bother You. I don't
So
I don't
there's a
know.
difference.
Anyway, but
You gonna package a book with it too? I want the whole package.
oh no, I don't know. No, there'll be an insert. But anyway, then there is the score. There's the score, and that's the stuff that is the voice of the film, and it's the stuff that the characters can't hear, and that's done by Tune Yards. And I was working with Tune Yards on this score before I was even in the Sundance Labs. I went to the Sundance Writers and Directors Lab. But so I've been working with Merrill from Tune Yard, Merrill and Nate, for years on this. And a lot of what we actually heard was some of the first quote unquote demos, like based on us just talking about inspirations and her reading the script and having ideas and going back and forth. And so when we shot this, there were a lot of things that I already had a good idea what the score was gonna be, so I could make movements and things like that and set up shots with that in my head.
That's beautiful. You shot this movie in your hometown. I'm proud of you that you shot it in Oakland, in the Bay Area. That's so important. We need that. Hollywood needs to come to the Bay Area. And you took that chance. Explain how difficult that process was. I know you had a lot of support.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, for me, that's just what the movie was. I mean, it wasn't even necessarily from some altruistic thing of I want to show Oakland and I want to give Oakland a chance. That's a good thing that can come from it, but I think people should write what they know. And I grew up in Oakland, and and for me, what I do with songs and what I've done with this has so much to do with the details in the world surrounding people, and I think that's a big part of what makes us. So I wanna show that, because that's a part of building the characters, building the story, and so yeah, I'm sure there are people in this audience that helped with the movie, right? No? Okay, that's one.
I did.
All right. We used Tyranny's house for Cassius's garage apartment.
Yeah, he came knocking on my door, bang, 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 and I was like, Boost, what do you want? It's like 9 in the morning. He's like, I want to use your house. I was like, cool, here go the keys. I'll see you later. My last question, you're incredible, and they're calling you the 2018 Genius of Movie World. I don't know if that means anything to you, but it means something to us, so we support you. Everybody in here, see the movie 3 or 4 times. God bless you. Continued success.
Thank you. Are we gonna do any questions from the audience?
Yeah, we can do that. Let's go. We got a question?